Thanks, Lulu. I want to really thank everyone for inviting me and for coming out on a dreary, rainy, cold night, the first dreary, rainy, cold night we've had in a long time. So you are really hoping to hear a great talk, and I'm hoping to deliver a great talk. I want to extend my condolences to Janet's archaeological family here. Janet was one of the first students that I worked with closely at the University of Calgary, as she was instrumental in pulling together the Calakmul meeting my first year here when I was the faculty sponsor, and I know how greatly missed she will be. This project that I'm talking about today is a new endeavor, so you're getting to see some of the newer insights that we are making in this particular region. We don't have a great deal of excavations at the moment, but we do have a number of great images and a lot of remote sensing and a lot of landscape information that we'll share with you tonight. I took out the land use strategies because as I was going through the paper, I realized I had very little on land use and almost all on urban development, or we would have been here for a 2-hour talk, not a 1-hour talk. But as all of our projects, this is a team effort, and I want to acknowledge, this is not the last draft. For some reason, I don't have my USB and I can't find my keys, which is really unfortunate because they open every door in the department. So if you find them, bring them back to me. But I want to acknowledge 2 authors who are not on here, and that's Dr. Megan Paramaki-Brown from Athabasca University and Dr. Sean Morton from Northwestern Polytechnic. And I couldn't have done this without them. They were part of the project, and we'll be talking about some of the data, and they are included on some of the slides, but the final version had them as an author, as well as Shane Montgomery, who does the land use, and I do talk about it a wee bit, but he also was an author on the final version. So this is the penultimate version with most of the good stuff, but not those 3 nuggets. So for those of you who don't know, and I think this may be a pretty educated audience, so we'll go through this really quickly. The Maya lowlands is located in eastern Mesoamerica and consists of the countries of Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Belize. We're going to be talking a lot about time periods, and I do have dates on some of the slides, but not all of the slides. So for your reference, we'll be talking about the middle pre-classic, very little, but some in some of the earlier or later slides, along with the late pre-classic, the early classic, the middle classic, as you can see, which is carved out of part of the early classic and the late classic, which we think is emerging as its own distinct temporal period with its own characteristics in this particular area. We don't know that it's as robustly defined in other parts of the Maya area, but in our area, it certainly does seem to be a discrete time period. Along with the late classic, the terminal classic, and the post-classic. So for those of you who are into chronologies, and we are very into chronologies on this project, you now have some dates to hang on to these late temporal labels. The Maya lowlands, as you can see, is quite a large area, so I wanted to give you some perspective. It's actually larger than Great Britain, including England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, so it's quite a large area and would encompass a number of other Western European countries. So we're not talking about a small region. This is a very large, very diverse area. We work in this area, which is called the Central Karstic Uplands, and you will not be tested on this, so But it is the highest region in this very low-lying peninsula, the Yucatan Peninsula. And the area where we work surrounds this large wetland area, which is called the Labyrinto, or the Bajo El Labyrinto. So it's a seasonal wetland. It's very wet during parts of the year, and other times it is quite dry. But it has a huge impact on the way that the settlement is distributed in this region. The outline that you see is an outline of our current LiDAR coverage, and I'll be coming back to that. The area is really known best for the site of Calakmul, which is a very large Maya city. It is one of the largest Maya cities. I've been told not to call it the largest, but it really is. And it was best known as the capital for a large political dynasty or regime called Calakmul, which in English means place of the snakes. So it was the capital for a couple of hundred years, from about 636 to probably the early part of the middle part of the 8th century. We know that it was the capital because of some inscriptions, and what was really odd is that this capital was only known from inscriptions sort of from sites outside of the capital. It talked about this really huge dynastic or large, powerful hegemony that had influence throughout the Maya area. It was these kings, the snake kings, were the overlords to a number of other local dynasties throughout the Maya region. But it was not until probably the late or sort of the mid-90s that we began to find enough inscriptions at Calakmul to really begin to determine that it indeed was the home of this particular dynasty. But it became slightly more tricky when inscriptions were also found at the site of Zibanche, which is located to the northeast of Calakmul. The site of Zibanche actually was the homeland or the locale for the Snake Kings before 636 AD, and at that point they relocated their capital to Calakmul. There are probably a lot of reasons for that. There's clearly a lot of agricultural land in the area, but also it's a very strategic location, not only for reaching and creating this major hegemony in the southern lowlands, but also because it's on a portage area or at the crossroads of two really important trade routes. A north-south trade route running north-south along the peninsula, and then an overland east-west trade route. And you can see this is one of the diagrams that show the political connections of Calakmul to a number of other large cities in the Maya lowlands as it slowly exerted its influence throughout the lowland area. So you can see it's at the center of a number of different kinds of relationships, many of them friendly, many of them allies, but some of them bellicose. And so it was really exerting a lot of influence and pressure and creating this large alliance in the Maya area. Now, we're more interested in what's going on right in and around Calakmul as all of this great political regime is expanding out throughout the Maya area. We haven't really looked at what's happening inside or directly around this large city, and so that's been the focus of this particular project. And this shows you some of the growth in the area. These are sites that were not discovered by us, but were discovered by, many of them by Dr. Yvonne Schrock, who did a number of surveys in this area and he found several different types of sites in the region, some which were there earlier and when at some point become part of this Calakmul regime, and we see changes in the actual orientation and layout in these sites, but other sites are completely new and founded by the Calakmul kings. And so we're beginning to parse out and understand how many new sites were created. So we'll be talking about some of the new sites that we have found that were actually appear to have been founded during this late Classic period. Now, one of the reasons we know quite so much about this large area is because we've been working with a LIDAR data set. So we've been collecting LIDAR in the region since 2014. We now have 266 square kilometers of LIDAR surrounding the Bajo El Laberinto, which is the wetlands, because we're interested in how this wetland, the important contributions the wetland made to the prosperity in the region. There's really no accident that people are gathering here and living on the edge of this large wetland. But as you can see immediately outside of the low-lying area near the wetland, it quickly rises to, the astonishing heights of, 350, 400 meters above sea level. So we're not talking about a great deal of height, but it's high for the Maya area because it's a very low-lying region. Now, Calakmul sits here. Let me see if I can. Here, in this area where we have this, these couple of really tall red dots there, which are actually structures. So it's really interesting that we can see the structures in the LIDAR. And there we find a huge city. And the city was actually mapped in the 1980s, and I just want to give a shout out and acknowledgement to Dr. William Follen and his team who mapped this site in the 1980s. It was actually drawn by a master surveyor, Jacinto Maihao, who I've never had the pleasure of meeting, but he made this incredible map using pace and compass. So this is a pace and compass map that he drew in the 1980s. It covers over 50 square kilometers, and he found over 6,500 structures. He determined that the urban core was roughly 1.75 kilometers square, and that there were 975 structures in the urban core, and the overall density of the 50 square kilometers that he found was 557 structures per square kilometer. Now, one of the things that we were interested in with the LIDAR was the accuracy of the Follen map, because a lot of interpretations of the urban development of Calakmul have been based on this particular map. And so we were clearly very interested in looking at the map and determining the accuracy of the map. And so what we discovered was that the map actually is remarkably accurate. We discovered several sites that are several clusters of buildings and some small buildings that the Follen team did not identify. We found a number of landscape modifications that the Follen team did not identify. We also found that things were in slightly the wrong place, and there were some inaccuracies with some of the roads that they proposed and some of the reservoirs that they suggested were there. But in general, it's a remarkably accurate map, and therefore we can then go on and look at the interpretations they made about the site based on that map as being very, very good interpretations. And that's really important for the history of scholarship at this site. This was an incredible amount of scholarship that took place, and we want to acknowledge that we're building on that. We're not reinventing the wheel here. But with LIDAR, you can do a number of things that you are not able to do with some of the earlier maps that we have. And one of the things that we've been working on is our density heat maps. So we've been looking at the LIDAR and trying to determine how dense was this area in general compared to other areas in the Maya lowlands as well as outside of the Maya lowlands. We're just now starting to work on outside of the Maya lowlands. The red are the most dense areas, and we've got a couple of different ways that we've modeled the density, but in general, we can see that there are several dense areas of population. Calakmul is clearly the largest one, but we have several other ones sprinkled around. So the very densest areas, what we would call the urban core, is surrounded by other areas of very dense population. So you begin to see people cluster together, 150 to 300 structures, not people, structures per square kilometer. In Calakmul, we've broken down the urban core into 3 discrete areas. And the urban core is roughly, I think it's like 5.85 meters square. I believe it's something, I don't think I have it up here. But in that area, it's 5.65 kilometers square. We have it broken down into 3 levels. So we have an urban core with low density of 300 to 450 structures per square kilometer, medium density 450 to 600, and then the very center of Calakmul, which has a density above 600 structures per square kilometer. This is important because it allowed us to then compare Calakmul to some other sites in the Maya lowlands regarding the size of Calakmul and the density. So these are some other large sites in the Maya lowlands. One of them, Nochtun, which is 41 kilometers southeast of Calakmul. I worked at Nochtun in the early 2000s, and they also have a large, dense couple of cores here. The total area of their block of LIDAR is 147 square kilometers, and they have a density of roughly 84 structures per square kilometer. Again, that would be above 300. The red would be a density of above 300. 89. I got my things mixed up. So this is Nochtun, this is Tikal. Tikal is 84. It's got a large urban core, but none of them are quite as large as Calakmul. So the overall density of the Tikal block is about 84 structures per square kilometer. Calakmul is much higher. Our area is roughly 160. We have over the entire 160 square kilometers a density of 97 structures per square kilometer, so much higher. Our urban core is larger than Calakmul's, and we define urban core based on that high density, that above 300 structures per square kilometer. So it's not based on any sort of arbitrary radius around the site center. But Calakmul is not the only city in this region. So I want to talk a brief bit about various cities and towns in the area. Clearly, Calakmul is the largest and the densest, so this shows you the area of density right around the urban core. And here we have the main civic ceremonial center that was built during the pre-classic period. It's full of religious structures. And to the north, then, we have an area that's added on during, we think, the early classic period, which is a very large marketplace. To the west and to the east, we have large palace structures, huge areas with large courtyards or patio groups, ball courts in them. These are where the court would have lived. And some of my colleagues, Felix Kuprat and Veronica Vasquez Lopez, have suggested that there may have been people from other courts living at Calakmul at this time. So Calakmul, the center of the city in and of itself, is very interesting and very dense. But we're in interested in areas outside of the civic center of Calakmul. We're interested in the areas all around it. And so I'll take you on a brief overview of some of the new cities and towns that we have found at Calakmul, or near Calakmul. This first one is called Tashil. Tashil is located, as you can see here, directly southeast of Calakmul. It's located on this sort of upland outcropping. It is a pre-classic site. We know this because of this particular architectural arrangement here. And it is also in a rectangular shape. Here, we see this modification, which is very much like early sites to the east of this region. So sites that are found along the Gulf Coast are built on these long rectangular platforms. And so they begin to make their way into the urban design during the pre-classic in this area as well. Now, we haven't dug this site. We do know from that architectural arrangement that at least part of it was occupied during the late pre-classic. And if you recall my first slide, you'll know that that's from 400 BCE to 200 CE. Now, located even further to the southeast, in this area here, is the site of El Laberinto. El Laberinto is a really interesting site. It's got two large complexes here, this one and this one here, and we'll talk a little bit about these later. These are administrative market centers, and this one is attached to a large triadic pyramid. So we know that El Laberinto has a late pre-classic population, and from the appearance of these other compounds, we know that it also continued to be populated and grew during the early classic and late classic periods. Another new site that we found in our LiDAR, we're calling our Cerros de Yeso site because it is near a huge outcropping of gypsum. So this is where we have a lot of gypsum in the area. Gypsum was used not only to help with the agricultural fields, but a number of other, making of plaster, various things. So they're mining gypsum in this area, and there's a large site nearby this large gypsum outcropping. And again, here's the site. It's on this large outcropping in the area, and settlements located on all the high ground around it. And we'll talk a little bit more because this site is more extensive than what's shown in this particular image. Then we have two new sites which are not even named yet. We just found these in about 6 months ago with a new LiDAR survey. This one is located south of Calakmul, so kind of directly south. We've only caught a bit of it. We think it extends over to the west-northwest a little more, and so we'll be expanding our LiDAR to the west and the northwest in probably 2025. But it is also an area very dense, over 300 structures per square kilometer settlement. Another site that we found is again located to the southeast. It is literally in the Bajo. So if you didn't have the LiDAR and didn't know that there was some higher ground in this area, you would think it was sitting in the middle of a wetland, and probably during the, that's this side, this side here. If you didn't know that there were these outcroppings here, you would probably think that there was nothing in this area because it's extremely low lying. Now, during the rainy season, this area probably looked like islands. I mean, it was that low. And so you would have a lot of water. There would have been a lot of investment in redirecting water for this particular site. So these two sites are not named. Maybe we'll have a contest to name them at some point. We also found something quite unexpected. We found moated sites, or sites that are encircled by a ditch, and there are many of them. There's not just one. So we found two on the edge of the Laberinto. They're hard to see. These are the ditches, and the settlements inside of these sites are very low-lying residential settlements. We even know that there's some agricultural terraces in this, thanks to Joshua Lockett Harris, who excavated this one for us. There are several located right along the edge of the Laberinto. Here's one that looks like it's literally in the Laberinto. We have one on the south side, this long rounded ditch, and another one here. And there's a sunken ball court next to it. These are all markers of post-classic communities. And this is something we didn't know about this region, was that it has a sizable post-classic occupation. And in the probably 2016, 2017, there was a student from the University of Calgary who actually excavated part of a canal here. And you can see the canal right there. And that is part of one of those ditches that's silted in. So there's settlement here. And we can't see it in the LiDAR. It's that low. But when we excavated this canal, it was full of post-classic offerings. And we found a lot of charcoal, and so we have some really great dates for this, ranging from 1450 to 1650. So we don't know if that actually reflects the time of occupation or if it's a termination, but that's quite late for this area. And so we've got lots of hypotheses on who these post-classic people are, and we are very excited to begin to look at this new sort of era of occupation in this region. Now, in terms of urban strategies, because I think we're here to sort of think about urban strategies a little bit, we're seeing some patterns emerge in this area. Now, the Maya area is not homogeneous. It is extremely diverse. There are regional patterns everywhere. So we're not suggesting that the patterns that we're viewing in this area are at play all over the Maya region, but we do think they are very robust patterns in our area, and so we're going to focus a little bit on exploring these patterns and maybe testing some hypotheses around them. So just real briefly, this is what we're going to be looking at in the upcoming iteration over the next 3 to 5 years of this project. Basically, what we think is that during the pre-classic period, all of these towns and cities are oriented around large religious complexes. They form the heart of these civic centers. But during the early classic and really more into the late classic, we begin to see this shift. And no longer do we have huge religious structures being built, but we have administrative centers and marketplaces being built, and settlement growing up around those particular architectural complexes, which now seem to form the center of large towns and cities. We're going to be looking at why they did, what that means for the political economy in the region. Did the Snake Kings come in and make these changes? We don't think so. Did these changes cause population to flood into the area? Because if you're an urbanist, a lover of urbanism, you know that cities attract people because of the opportunities in cities. Was population flooding in because these opportunities were there, or did the opportunities arise because population density grew so much? And was there a reorganization of labor? Can we see the reorganization of labor and a move towards an emerging and more robust middle class in this area? So to do that, we're starting pretty much at ground zero. We don't even have a basic chronology for a lot of these sites, so we're doing a lot of testing. We're collecting a lot of what we would consider baseline data, and then we'll go back and refine some of the hypotheses and expand our study as we analyze the data that we're currently collecting. Despite the fact that there's been almost 40 years of continuous work at Calakmul, we really don't know that much about the settlement because the work's really concentrated in the Civic Center. Now, Calakmul also had this pattern. It's just that in their Civic Center, the religious structures continued to be used and modified. But we also see the construction of a huge marketplace complex at Calakmul. It's one of the largest marketplaces, and we can pretty confidently say it's a marketplace because in the middle of the marketplace is a little temple, and on that temple are murals showing people at a market selling things. So there are vendors, there's street food, there's all kinds of things. There's glyphs telling us what these vendors are actually selling. So we have a really great body of evidence that shows that this area is a marketplace. I have colleagues who will be going back in late December and January to do some more formal testing of this area. So we're going to be getting some geochemical analysis, looking for patterns of activity in the marketplace, looking at some of the stalls in the area. One of the interesting things about the Calakmul marketplaces and the marketplaces in our region is that there are permanent shops, permanent stalls where people are selling items. They're probably selling on the patio and in the plaza as well in sort of temporary or ad hoc areas, but there are permanent places to set up shop in these markets, which make you look at the market economy as one that people are more invested in. They're putting more labor towards creating these permanent marketplaces. These are not multifunctional spaces any longer. So we have this one, but we also have a new market in the area, and we're calling it a new market because it's not as large. The stalls, there are stalls there, they're permanent places for people to sell things, but they're not as large as the one we see at the Cheap Knob. So we have the Southwest Market. And the Southwest Market is located next to a sock bay, and there seems to be a lot of literature talking about markets being easily accessible, and there being roadways or the sock bay is a raised road. Sock bays are raised roads going to markets, or at least nearby. And there's also an administrative area, a complex where people lived adjacent to the market, maybe in looking at the market oversight and collecting what we all know governments like to collect, taxes and tribute, to help fund the government and get their cut of any transactions that were taking place at the market. So these are the two that are in Calakmul. They're not very far apart. As you can see, they're 1.6 kilometers apart. This is actually really close together. These are quite close together. But we have other markets. This one is a large market along about 30 kilometers from Calakmul. So here, no, actually that's closer. That's probably about 16 square kilometers from Calakmul. It's at a site called Pared de los Reyes. This is the market itself. This is the administrative center next to the market. Big plaza, small temple, lots of houses around it. And this is the northern part of the market. So we have a huge area and this is quite large. This is a very large market in the Pared de los Reyes area. We also have markets along the southern edge or the northern edge of the Bajo Laberinto. So it's on south of Calakmul, north of the Bajo, along that northern block. And we have two markets here. Again, these are very large markets in this area. Here's the nested pattern right in here. My dot is right over the administrative center. Here is a dot right over the markets. Here's some larger ones. Here's the nested center and the administrative buildings attached. Again, nested center, administrative building, it's attached. These are 3.6 kilometers apart. So for those of you who don't know how long it takes to walk 3.6 kilometers, it's less than an hour walk between these two, if you're real slow. So it's a slow, easy, leisurely stroll between these markets. We also have two markets in the Cerros de Yeso area. We have two markets also in the Laberinto area. So we have, oops, sorry, keep pressing the wrong button. Here are the two markets at Laberinto. So here is one. This is the one attached to the early triadic group, and this is the one, and it's attached to large administrative structures. This is the larger of the two. We have ideas about the development of these markets. We think they developed out of plazas, that plazas were used as markets, and then they move into these more permanent spaces. And they are very, in this region, iconic architectural arrangement. So when you see this arrangement, you think market. Outside of this region, and by this region I mean north of Nochtun, which is far northern Guatemala, and up into the sort of the middle of the Yucatan Peninsula. So not a huge area, but there are more permanent structures dedicated to market exchanges in these regions. We also have two here at Cerros de Yeso, so we have two in this area as well. There's one here, and there's another one. I can't see it on my map, but there's another one. There are two there, and they're 1.4 kilometers apart. They're actually the closest. Now we also have a new architectural style which shows up in the area, and these are for residential compounds. And we're calling it the El Laberinto style because it's from the El Laberinto area. And these are large, multi-courtyard room blocks, like apartment compounds, where we have lots of people living. And so I can tell you that this particular block, I did the math on it, this particular block, got a couple of temple structures here. We have some courtyards. They're all connected. They're on a low-lying platform. And this particular one that I am showing you here, we're only talking about this one right here in this area. Okay, so that one has 56 individual structures, not rooms, structures. These are actually really large. It looks really small on the map, but we've been there. These are big. If we use the same numbers that are used for number of people in structures at other sites, for instance, at Teotihuacan, which is a big site in central Mexico, the intermediate groups there have been hypothesized to have 7.4 people per structure. If you multiply 7.4 times 56, you get 414.4 people. But we know they're not all occupied. They're not all rooms. They're not all occupied. Generally, you take around 15% as not being occupied, so you'd have a general occupancy of 352 people in this particular compound, if the same principles that have been proposed at other sites work here at Calakmul. And we're just starting to excavate them, so this is all a very preliminary analysis, but this is what we're beginning to look like. So these are the ones that we're finding. We've got lots of them, but these are examples from Calakmul. We're sort of putting them in different categories: small, less than 20 structures, 20 to 40 being intermediate structures, and above 40 being what we would call large structures. And then we have the palaces, which are another level of interlocking courtyards, an exponential leap above these smaller residential compounds. But they extend beyond Calakmul. The largest one we have is at Pared de los Reyes, south of the market. It has 66 structures. Laberinto The group next to the marketplace has a number of structures. We have them at Yashnokah, which is 21 kilometers southeast of Calakmul, and we have them at the new unnamed site. This one here, you can see this particular structure where we have a number 31. So this would be like our medium structure. This is also a medium structure. Everything else we would put into the very large category. We do have this sort of organic growth seen at other sites. So this is the site of Choktoon, which is located north of Calakmul, quite a bit north, probably about 150 kilometers north, 120 kilometers, between 120 and 150. I haven't done the actual measurement. But the difference is here, some of these are part of administrative complexes. So some of these are, we don't know that all of these are domestic structures, but you can see these interlocking courtyards at all of these sites. Another place where we see interlocking courtyards in a much more grid-like pattern is at Teotihuacan. The average persons per structure at Teotihuacan is based on this particular intermediate status apartment compound, but these are to scale. So this is the scale of the one at Calakmul, and this is the scale of those at Teotihuacan. So while there are some noticeable differences in the arrangements, we do also see that in terms of scale, they are very similar, and they're putting people together in these large residential blocks. Now, Linda Manzanilla, who's an archaeologist in central Mexico, has suggested for many, many years that these apartment compounds were centers for production and that they were working on economies of scale. So they've changed their production pattern to be able to produce more things more efficiently by living and working together in these groups. And so we're beginning to put together our marketplace exchanges with perhaps economies of scale and changes in residential structure, and talk about really shifting political economies in this area. Now, agricultural features, this is the land use. If you want to know more about land use, I'm sure I'll be talking sometime about land use, but hopefully my graduate student, Shane Montgomery, will be giving some talks about land use because this is his area of expertise, as well as my co-director, Dr. Armando Anaya, who is here today, and I don't know where he's sitting, but he also works extensively with the land use and looking at the various landscape modifications in the area. So in terms of land use, if you don't have a house built on it, then it's agricultural land. Everything is being used for agricultural land in this area. So here we have evidence of canals. You can see these are canals going through here, and I did not have time to pull the slide we have actually excavated in one of these canals, and we can literally see the construction of the canal. And one of the things we find pretty fascinating about it is that on the edge of the canals, they're not just straight lines coming up, so they're not U-shaped canals. They actually are like terraced down, and so we think they're using the banks of the canals to actually grow certain kinds of crops with deeper roots, so as the water from the canals actually seeps out, the crops right next to the canals that need a little more water are getting more water. So this is an area of intensive agricultural productivity, or intense agricultural investment in the area. Now, that's a lower lying area. That's a low-lying area where they're channeling water that would naturally collect here. But we also have upland areas, and this to me is what is so incredibly astonishing about Calakmul. This is the upland area, and these are the terraces we see. And this upland area is right at the edge of what we would probably call the Calakmul city. We think the Calakmul city itself may have had an 8-kilometer radius from the site center to the edge of the formal city of Calakmul. because settlement begins to drop off in this area. But instead of settlement, you're getting terraces, you're getting fields, you're getting milpas, you're getting soil dams, you're getting albaradas, which are long, sort of ravine-like areas. You're getting circular areas for farming. This is all being terraformed for farming. They're moving soil into this area. We've done a number of excavations, both on this side of the Bajo and in the southern side of the Bajo, to know that they're actually scraping off the soil, modifying the bedrock as they want, and then bringing soil back in to put on top of it and building walls around it. So this is an intensive investment in agriculture in this area, which you would expect given the numbers of people that were living there. They wanted food security. They did not want to have to import enough food for this large population. And so we believe that they were investing in this and that this was mostly used locally, but certainly some of it must have been used as commodities for long-distance trade as well. There are a number of things that are not actually available in this area. Things like obsidian, which are important things that you need for cutting and you need for various craft production, various types of tasks that you do. So you would have imported obsidian. Surprisingly, there's no palm in this area. Palm is a very important commodity. Palm you need for roofs. You make your roofs out of large palm fronds, and there's not this kind of palm frond that grows abundantly in this area. It grows abundantly in other areas, but not this one. So we think we're getting a number of agricultural cash crops being grown in the region as well. One of the things that would have grown exceptionally well in the area is cotton, because we've got very well-drained soils, and so cotton may have been a really important crop. And we're doing a lot of palynology to look at these, but we're also using ancient DNA. So we're beginning to get some results from ancient DNA right now. We're able to give a good estimate of the biodiversity in the forest during pre-Hispanic periods based on some DNA analysis in the southern area, because we've been working there longer. We have found some crops. We've certainly found corn. We've certainly found cotton. We've also found some unusual kinds of crops that may have been grown in the region. So we're using multiple lines of evidence to try and give us information about the crops grown in the area. So while DNA is one line of evidence, we also do a lot of survey in these areas, and in some of these areas we're finding remnant communities of certain kinds of crops. So in one region we're finding a lot of maguey. Only in this one area, lots of maguey. And so we think we may be seeing communities of plants that were grown by the Maya that after the abandonment of the area just kept perpetuating, self-replicating. And so that is one of the, I think that might even be my phone. I apologize for not turning it off. So we know that the agricultural productivity in this area was great, and it may have been one of the things that drew people to the area. Now, while we've done a lot of remote sensing, we're really just now getting into the actual archaeology of the region, and I want to acknowledge the many, many people that have contributed to the archaeological excavations in the area. A few are here, many are not here, but we've had an enormous amount of people who come in to lend their expertise to the project and help us excavate this immense area. So these are some of the places where we've begun to test the households in the area. We've only begun systematic testing over the last 2 years, but we had some testing that was done prior to that. So this is the Yashnokah testing area where we've tested at various households in throughout the city over the number of years. At Yashnokah we focused on something different. We were focusing on the pre-classic occupation of the site. It's a very important pre-classic site. But we did begin to test all kinds of residential features probably beginning around 2016. So we have a few tests and many, many larger horizontal excavations in this area. And this is the testing that we've been doing at Calakmul. So this is our first year of testing at Calakmul. This shows you our actual design for testing. Overall, we're trying to test a variety of residential features or other types of structures in the settlement. So we're not looking at the site center. We're sticking to the settlement. So while we may test a market in the settlement, we're not really looking at the main civic precinct of Calakmul. So we're looking at the areas around that main civic precinct. So far, we've tested 3 Laberinto compounds at Calakmul and 3 at Yashnokah. We've looked at what's called the Plaza Plan 2, and I'll tell you what that means in just a second. It's a particular kind of architectural arrangements. So we've looked at 1 at Calakmul. We have a lot of platforms that we've tested, just what look like simple platforms, maybe with 1 or 2, maybe even 3 or 4 ground level structures on top that you don't really see well in the LiDAR. So they're very simple. What we call L-shaped groups or C-shaped groups or I groups, which are arrangements in capital L, capital C, and capital I arrangements, kind of on ground level patios or plazas. So we've done a lot of testing of those. We've looked at some marketplaces. We've looked at one of the ditched communities and one of the settlements inside the ditched community, which is why we can absolutely tell you that it's post-classic. And we've looked at palaces, so a palace at Yashnokah. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I don't want to bore you too much. But this is some of the results of the testing. There's a lot of writing on here. Basically, what I'm going to tell you is that we've looked at a Laberinto group. This is what we would call a medium-sized Laberinto group, not a particularly large one. I think this one has 35, 36 structures in it. And what we found was that it was initially built during the early classic. So we don't have enough ceramic data to tell you whether it's the end of the early classic or the beginning of the early classic, but certainly in the period between 200 and 550 CE. It does have a later occupation, so it does go into that beyond 550 into the 650 to 800 period, but it's very small, at least from what we've tested thus far. So we don't have a lot of data coming from that later period. So that's the one at, actually several, all three at Calakmul had that same sort of pattern. Early classic, big building thrown up with a small late classic occupation on top. Similar at Yashnokah, so we have some late classic ones. So at Yashnokah, the Laberinto group, one of the Laberinto groups was actually built during the late classic, so post 650. And then some testing shows that in general in this area far away, these groups actually are much later. They're originally built much later. We have one that actually may be more terminal classic, 800 to 900 in time. So we're seeing a little bit of disjunction in the chronology between those near Calakmul and those further away. Once we start doing broader horizontal excavations, I'm sure we're going to be able to work this out, but it's probably that Calakmul was had a boom time earlier, and then people came in and just made use of what was already there in these labyrinto-style groups. We have also excavated one, what's called Plaza Plan 2. We have these all over Calakmul. We have very few outside of Calakmul, but we have a number in Calakmul. And a Plaza Plan 2, here is a diagram of a Plaza Plan 2. It's a patio or a plaza with structures on all sides, but a shrine on the east. And it got its very fancy name from the site of Tikal in the 1960s when the University of Pennsylvania project was working there. And Mayans are incredibly creative people. We tend to number our arrangements and or give them alphabetical labels. So we have E groups and Plaza Plan 2s. So unfortunately, we historically have been pretty boring in how we name our architectural complexes. But the Plaza Plan 2 is seen all over the Maya area, and we have a number at Calakmul. Plaza Plan 2s in other regions date to the early classic, and it's the same at Calakmul. So the one that we've dug so far is very clearly an early classic construction. What's interesting about this one, though, is that it's connected by a sakbe to the marketplace. And so it may have a very specific relationship with the marketplace. And if the marketplace arose in the early classic alongside the Plaza Plan 2, we may be seeing a relationship again between this residential area and this very important marketplace. We also have plazuela groups, which are a series of groups on elevated patios or platforms. We've dug several at Yashnoka. One is an extensive, both of them were fairly extensive. Both of them originated in the late pre-classic and slowly accretionally grew over time to the late classic. One is near a very small local market and may have been the administrative center or the administrative complex attached to that market, overseeing all market activities. That's the Shimbal Che group that's being dug by Matt Longstaff, who is a PhD student here at the University of Calgary. And the other, the Woe group, dug by Sean Morton and Megan Paramaki-Brown, also shows that slow accretional growth over time. Both have very large occupations in the late pre-classic. So we're seeing these two types of groups slowly grow and never abandoned over time along in that southern area. We then have all these other compounds which are L-shaped or C-shaped or I-shaped. They're more ground level. They're not high elevated platforms. They tend to be early classic or late classic in date, so they don't tend to have as much late pre-classic associated with them. We have one here near the Woe group that had some pre-classic, but most of the pre-classic actually was in a underground storage area called a Shultun, and so there may have been pre-classic occupation around it, and then as they built on top of this area, they covered over this underground storage chamber and built an early classic structure on top of it. We don't know where the early classic actual structure might have been, but we do have evidence there is early classic around this area. So we do, again, think that we're seeing some long-term occupation in some of these groups. We also have what we have called, we call them simple platforms, we call them elevated platforms. In the literature, you might even see them referred to as pre-classic platforms because you're easily identifiable in the LiDAR. They look like a little square block, sometimes a little fuzzy, like they're a little eroded, melted square block on the LiDAR. And we were very interested in looking at the chronology of these because we have read a number of articles that claim that you can tell they're pre-classic because of the eroded nature of these particular structures. One of them, the one we chose, the very first one we put Joshua Lockett Harris, and we asked him to excavate, was the ugliest structure at Calakmul that we could find in the LiDAR. It looked ripped up, it looked completely eroded, looked like it had been there for a very long time. It was not an elegant, beautiful structure. It was very hard to see in the LiDAR, and so we wanted to start with what we thought probably was the likeliest candidate to be an early structure showing a lot of erosion. It turned out to not be so. It also had an early classic occupation with a late classic occupation on top. What's really interesting is the only one, we dug 2 at Calakmul and 1 at, actually more than 1 at Yashnokah. We dug 3 at Yashnokah over the years. Only one of them was actually a pre-classic platform. All the others were either early classic or late classic. The ones at Calakmul were even more intriguing because they contained really beautiful dedicatory caches. And you don't usually think of these beautiful dedicatory caches being in what we would consider low status homes. And so we're beginning to rethink how we measure wealth in the area. Wealth, one of the proxies in our field that's used for measuring wealth is the size of residential architecture. It's very easy to quantify, and you can apply all sorts of cool statistics to it. But what we're finding is that the actual material culture found when you excavate these don't always correspond to what you might think the status of the house is, or the occupants of the house are, based on the size of the house. Certainly that's one measurement, but it's not the only measurement. And here we see a good juxtaposition. These are beautiful bowls. This is a really lovely, what did we finally decide it was? Nonzal, like an early classic, or a middle, it's actually a middle classic red bowl, large red bowl. Here we have a Dos Arroyos orange polychrome, a bowl that was used for serving at fancy elite banquets. It was very elaborately decorated. And so we have these caches here that show us that these occupants were not actually, we're not out of the loop in terms of their ability to secure high status goods. We also have a number of obsidian coming from all of our households, which is considered a luxury item in the area. Shell beads, I think Josh found shell beads and a jade bead in one of these. Did you not find a jade bead, Josh?
Not in these contexts.
Okay. But we have we're accumulating a body of data that says that you have to balance the size and volume of a structure along with the goods that you're finding within the structure itself to have a better holistic understanding of social stratification in the region. And you also can't use LiDAR to tell you the chronology of a structure. Finally, we did actually dig in that possible marketplace in the southwestern part of Calakmul. In my opinion, it's pretty much a marketplace. It does not have plaster floors. It has clay floors. It has 2 clay floors, one dating to the Middle Classic period, that period between 450 and 650, and then another flooring event where the market may have expanded in the Late Classic period, and by Late Classic that would be more 650 to 800. Now why I keep coming back to those dates is because we always thought that Calakmul was heavily influenced, and the size and the prosperity of the city was heavily influenced by the relocation of the capital of the Khanul regime to Calakmul. But it appears that Calakmul was actually quite a well-off and prosperous and large city before the capital was moved there. And finally, in terms of testing, we have 2 more testings. We have a palace that we excavated at Yashnokha. What's really interesting about the palace is that the palace has some pre-classic and early classic occupations, but it was abandoned by about 650. So this may, in fact, this abandonment of the palace and the attached religious complex, which is the subject of Joshua Lockett Harris's dissertation, may have been deeply affected, and the ability of Yashnokha to remain an autonomous kingdom may have been deeply affected by the movement of the Calakmul kings to Calakmul. Yashnokha was one of the closest sites to Calakmul, and the only one with a large palace in this region, and so it's starting to look like they, whatever was going on, all the political autonomy that Yashnokha had dissipated with the arrival of the Calakmul kings. And finally, also, something that Joshua Lockett Harris contributed to the project is his work in the post-classic settlement. We're pretty excited about this for a couple of reasons. First, it's very cool to find so much post-classic in the area. We know it's post-classic because we found a lot of post-classic points in the excavations. But what we also found, and it's the only place at the site at Calakmul that we found it, is a continuous occupation from the late pre-classic all the way through to the post-classic is in this particular community. This low-lying, very unapparent residential structure has the longest sequence at the site so far in a residential structure. So they're obviously looking at areas that were on the edge of the Bajo, so close to really good agricultural lands, defensible, and they had a moat around it. They had some fields inside of the moated area, but it's an area that would have been attractive for millennia to people living in this region. So we're anxious to go back and do some work in this area as well. So after this whirlwind overview of our work for the last few years at Calakmul and touching on some of the work that we've been doing for over a decade in the region, we have some preliminary thoughts on the area, and these are preliminary, so I don't want you to hold us to them because we all know the more you dig, the more you find out how wrong you are. So here are preliminary thoughts on the region. It, no doubt, is one of the most heavily populated regions in the Maya lowlands, especially from 650 to roughly 800, possibly even as early as 450. It's just enormous. We've compared it to other sites. We feel like we're probably being very conservative and saying one of the lowest at around 700. It was probably one of the largest cities in the Americas, and I think we're sort of teasing around some population estimates right now, so I don't want to really go into our population estimates yet, but we think it's at least double what's been proposed for the city before. We have a lot of cities and towns in the area which during early periods were dominated by religious structures, and we see a real shift in how civic centers are constructed and what comprises the nucleus of cities and towns during the early classic, and then really going into the late classic period. They become much more commercial. They have much more emphasis on administrative structures, which would go along with some real changes in the economies as well as in governance in the region. We do see a lot of different kinds of residential architecture, so we believe the area is quite diverse, but we also see the emergence of a style of architecture which may have some real implications for size of corporate group or community living in these apartment compounds, as well as for the way that production is organized in the area, which would go along with some of those shifting economic, shifting economies that we're seeing in the region. We know that both of the marketplaces in Calakmul were built before the arrival of the Calakmul kings now. So we know that the Calakmul kings did not bring this idea of a market economy to the region. And in fact, the population growth also appears to have been earlier than the arrival of the Calakmul kings. So the Calakmul kings may have been attracted to this area for some of the same reasons that people were attracted to this area. It seems like it was a pretty booming area. And finally, there's a very robust post-classic occupation and population in the region that we actually had very little knowledge of, and no knowledge pretty much, of this post-classic occupation, which opens all kinds of questions about, did people stay after the big cities collapsed and form these small communities? Did people move back into the area for some reason at some point during the post-classic period? So we've got lots of questions about the post-classic, but it is very interesting to see and makes this area quite long-lived, going from roughly 1000 BC to around 1450 to 1550 CE. So we've got over 2 millennia, like 2.5 millennia of occupation in the area, which is one of the longest that we have in the Maya lowlands. So that is where we are with our project. As you can see, we have a large group. Each and every one of these people contributed enormously to the project. Here we all are standing on the largest structure at Calakmul. We plan to be at Calakmul for as long as they'll let us stay and dig. I don't know that we'll ever move out of this region. There seems to be a lot of work to be done. And I want to acknowledge all the people who have helped make this happen, including Adriana Velasquez-Morlet, who was my co-PI on the LIDAR grant that we got through SHRC, INA, CONACYT, NSF, enormous numbers of partners helping with this research. So thank you very much for having me.